Hello, I'm Debbie Ellickson, and I am going to share with you some simple steps on creating your manuscript. And there is no right or wrong way to do this, but I'm just going to start and go through this presentation slide by slide, and hopefully you'll be able to pick up some tips that'll help you. So when it comes to ideas are not copyright, and you can have 50 different writers write the same story, but each writer is going to come across the story differently. They might have a different angle on it, or they may use different words to describe it. So you can take those 50 different stories and line them up side by side, and they're not going to be identical. It's when you take an idea and the words from one of the writers and put it in as your written material, then that is plagiarism. So when you take ideas from other writers, as long as you're not using their words verbatim, it's not an issue. So plagiarism, in a simplified term, is basically stealing somebody else's work. Whereas you can use somebody's work, you can use a piece in somebody's book or magazine article or whatever, but as long as you credit the source, you credit who wrote it and where you found that piece. And even if you found it on the internet, because everything on the internet is also copywritten, you can get permission from authors or publishers to copy certain sections of a book or magazine, but that may or may not necessarily be needed if you credit the source. It depends on how much you're taking from the original source. Now, if you have any issues at all, there are copyright laws in every country, so whatever country you're living in, I encourage you to Google the copyright laws to find out what is proper in that country compared to, I can share with you what's proper in Canada, but it may not necessarily be the same in Sweden or wherever. But the bottom line is, if you're going to use a line from somebody else's work, you need to credit that source, and that is where a lot of writers get into trouble. And even if you're posting photographs especially are copyright as well, and we need to credit the source on that as well. And if you're going to be republishing a photograph in your book, you need to get permissions from that, and you need to find the source of that photograph. Even if you found it on the internet, you may have to do a lot of investigative reporting to find the original photographer, who is probably the copyright holder of that photograph. So there's a little bit of work involved in getting permissions, and the easiest way is just to do it yourself. Take your own photographs, write your own words. Always give credit when you use somebody else's work. Now, let's take a look at any object that you have around. There's a story in everything. And if you've never written anything in your life, take an object. For instance, take a look at this apple. This apple has many stories behind it. There's the story of the person who bought the apple and is going to eat the apple. The apple may have its own story. You can take a story and write it from the apple's perspective and what it feels like when somebody's going to eat it, or whether it rots on the shelf or not. There's also other stories behind the apple, where it's grown in the field, who owns the orchard where the apple came from, and maybe the stories around the people who grew that apple. There's the apple goes from the orchard, it goes into a truck and gets transported to the grocery store. So there's all sorts of little stories you can create from where the apple is grown until it ends up in somebody's kitchen. All you have to do is to kind of get started in writing, even if, like I say, even if you've never written a word in your life. Just take a picture, any picture, and write what you see. You just need to write one paragraph. That's an exercise to get you started. And that paragraph, you could flesh that out eventually and turn it into a book. But look at everything as the story behind it, even the objects that are sitting on your desk. They came from somewhere. Some sort of processing it has been involved to get it from A to B to C to D. So look at everything as a story. This is the one thing that scares the heck out of every writer, whether they have never written before or whether they have 100 books under their belt. And I can tell you that every writer will tell you the same thing. The scariest thing is the big blank white word page. And it's intimidating. It's very difficult to look at when you know you're on a deadline, especially. But what it comes right down to is getting the words on the papers. So sometimes that apple exercise might help you get into the mood of writing. But the blank page scares everybody. You don't know what to write about, so look in your own experiences. What do you know that others don't know? So, for instance, if you have a passion for flowers and people from your neighborhood, your friends and family know that you grow the best flowers that anybody has ever seen, and you really love flowers, and you know all the ins and outs of growing flowers, you know the different kinds of flowers, and you know what grows well in certain climates. So you may be an expert on flowers. You could write a book on flowers. Who comes to you, and what do they come to you for? There's people that might come to you for specific advice all the time. If it happens a lot, then that might be a clue on something that you could write about. If you are working in a certain industry, what are some of the trends that are happening in it? If you own a business, what's the story behind you setting up your business? So there's all sorts of things that you can look at in your own life to create a story. If you're going through an illness, what is the process of discovering it, and what do you have to do to get well? What sort of challenges have you gone through that you can share with other people, but not make it about you? Make it about healing, and make it about helping somebody else who might be going through the same issues. This is a big thing that comes with that big blank white page, is fear. Probably one of the biggest fears a lot of people have is writing. And it's something that I'm not really sure how to describe it, but people do have a real fear of it. So one of the ways to conquer that fear is to find something you are really, really passionate about. Find a reason to write. So you could also find some stories in your family that you might want to share with your kids. So make it about tradition. Make it about make it a project that you can do with your kids. It doesn't matter how old your kids are. Heck, even if they're 18 and 20. sit down and maybe do a project together with them. It doesn't have to be 300 pages. So find a reason to write, even if it's to bring you closer to your kids. It's little small steps. You don't have to write 300 pages all in one shot. It's taking little tiny steps to build that stamina to get it into your repertoire. So that is why I shared that little exercise with the apple, because that's one of those little steps you can take to kind of get you started. You can mix it up. It doesn't have to be the written word. You can mix media a project. It can be written, it can be used, you would use photographs, you can have video, all sorts of media you can incorporate in with your stories. And it doesn't even have to be written at all. It could be other formats. So where do you start? Well, again, you need to get used to writing. If you want to be taken serious as a writer, you have to start getting serious about writing. So get used to writing, and you can do that through journaling, through blogging. A lot of people have blogs. So start looking at your blog as a way to practice your writing skills. And it's just a matter of getting the words on paper, so to speak. Once you get them down, then you can worry about how to shape them and edit them later. But it's just getting them down, and that's sometimes the hardest part. I've talked to so many people where they will try and edit as they write, and if you do that, you'll never get it done. You get it down first, get the ideas down first, and then you go back and you start shaping it, and then you edit it. So another way to get kick-started, and also to break the fear of writing, is to watch people. So when you're in the mall and you're sitting there having a coffee at the kiosk, just watch people and maybe make up some stories and try to figure out who's that person and what are they talking about. Take a look at what other people are doing. That's sometimes a fun thing that a lot of writers do, and you can actually practice dialogues on that and learning dialogues from watching other people. Commercials. I get a lot of ideas from commercials. TV, watching a TV show, YouTube, birds, pictures. There's so many things out there that you can watch, and they will kickstart some ideas in your head. If you are just stuck and you're not sure how to start, you know what you want to write about, but you're not necessarily sure how to get it started, sometimes just stop thinking and just get out of the house, maybe go for a drive or go shopping or anything to kind of relax your brain, and sometimes that's when that idea comes back to you. You can blend poetry and songs. A lot of fun to write your own words to some of the song lyrics out there. Rewrite anything. Find an article and rewrite it. Find a novel and just copy what you've read, or just take a look at what might come next. Change the ending. One of the things that will help you put a book together as well, and you kind of need this if you're going to pitch it to a publisher, is you need to put its resume together, and part of that resume is the title. And sometimes the title is the hardest thing to write. And your title should be descriptive, it should be punchy, it should really tell you what's in the book. But a good title will draw somebody into the book, and then you need a good description. So you can cheat on this in a way. Just take a look at other books. Take a look at other books that jump off the shelf at you. Read some other back covers and see how other writers have done it. And use some of their ideas and how to make craft what you're doing and make it punchy as possible. So your description, your general overview, consider that as your back cover copy. That is what sells the book. That is what's going to draw the reader to the book. And you know, you need to almost put as much work into that as you do the book itself. And it's not going to come right off the bat. It'll take some work. It's going to be a work in progress. You'll come up with a description. You might even come up with a title, and then you're going to change it halfway down the road and maybe even again further on. What you also need to know is what's on the market that's similar to what you're writing or you're planning on writing. And what you would do is you could go to Chapters Indigo in Canada on their website and take a look at those books. But I like to go to Amazon, and the reason I go to Amazon to check book titles there is because Amazon is kind of the catch-all for traditionally published books and the independently published books. Now, there is no copyright on a title, but you don't really want to put a book out with the same title as somebody else's. It'll give you an idea on what is out there, and then if you find books that are written exactly in the same idea that you have, kind of break it down one or two sentences and have that on the side, because what's going to happen is if you do pitch it, the publisher is going to want to know that, because they're going to find out anyway whether somebody else has written that same book. So if you did that at the beginning of the process and somebody else wrote the same book, you can actually tweak the angle so that you can make yours unique from what they're doing. Know your audience right down to the underwear they wear, if you can. Your audience isn't everybody. Your audience is specific. So if you've written the Twilight series, you know that your audience is not going to be a certain audience. It's going to be a younger audience. So know who your audience is and know where they live, so research them as much as you can. Your qualifications as the author doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be a well-accomplished writer. Maybe it's a subject of the book that makes your qualification. So again, if you're the person that is the expert on flowers, even though you don't have a degree in it, but people come to you for it, that gives you the qualifications for writing that book, because people really come to you for that advice. So, but your qualifications are also important, because people want to know, well, why did you write this book, or why should I read this book from you when somebody else wrote this book? So those are, if you can answer that why in this resume, that will help you with your pitch with a publisher as well. The other thing that they will ask you after you do those up to the author qualifications, you're going to have to come up with a marketing plan, rather, when you pitch it to publisher. And that's going to have to be something fairly comprehensive. Now that's another hangout, and that's another training program. But marketing plan specific to your target audience, come up with some ideas, and that one of the things that the publisher wants to see is that you're going to be physically involved in the marketing of your own book and not leaving it up to somebody else. If you have all those in it, and say you pitch it to a publisher, and if they decide that they like it, they're going to come back and ask you for a preliminary table of contents. You don't necessarily have to submit that right away when you're doing your pitch, but it's a good thing to get in the habit of creating one of those. And usually, if you kind of know what you want to write about, your table of contents is something that also helps guide you through breaking that down into smaller pieces to write about. So your manuscript is like a sculpture. It starts with this big slab of stone, and then you just you start chipping away at it, and the chipping is the editing process, and the tools you use break off smaller pieces as you go along. Your proofing has to be meticulous, and if you are pitching to a publisher, if you've got errors in your, if you have spelling errors, if you've got grammatical errors, that is, people won't even look at your email if you've got errors. Gosh, I have so many examples of emails and letters from people who wanted me or somebody to publish their story, but they never edited what they wrote in the cover letter, or so you're not even going to get past the first line of the cover letter if it's poorly written and there's errors galore. There's no way you're going to publish that story. So be meticulous. And also, if you're going to be doing it yourself as a self-publishing project, you still need to do this because your writer deserves to have the best product out there. So don't let anything leave your possession, even an email. Don't let it leave your possession unless it's as perfect as you can get it. You may miss a few things. Everybody does. We're all human. But if you've given that 7 times rule, read it over 7 times before you hit the send button, then you can be fairly confident that it'll be well received on the other end. And writing is that way. It's continuously reading over and reading over and reading over your work, maybe reading it out loud. The good writer the good writing is good because they've done the work behind it. While it seems to flow off the page without exertion, that's what makes it that way. And mean every word that you write. So in the editing process, you'll be shaving off words that you don't need, and I'll give you some tips as we go along. So there are some tools to the writing trade. Some of these are old school for sure, and obviously the internet is one. You're on Google Hangouts right now, and that is a huge tool for interviewing people. And to heck, you could, well, I'm doing a story right now, aren't I? I'm pushing up this presentation. The tools that I use a lot, I still use a notepad and pen to write stuff down, and I also use a tape recorder. I find my digital tape recorder is my best friend. Also, as Google's your best friend. So even when I think I have all the research done for a book, I find that as I'm going through writing it and editing it, I'm continually going to Google to check spelling, to just double check stuff and my sources just to make sure that it's correct. And getting to the right down to the manuscript itself, you can break it into topics. So, for instance, in my Inside the NHL book, in the Inside the NHL Dream book, I had broken down certain topics. So I had the money, I had the draft, I had retirement, I had all sorts of different elements to playing hockey in my topics. And once you put down all these topics, and then I went through all these interviews that I did, and I pulled out the interview portion that was related to the specific topics, and then I organized the topics and created the book that way. And then you would also have main topics and subtopics. So there are some topics that may not necessarily be strong enough to say, carry a chapter, but they could be subtopics underneath underneath another main topic. So just when you break it down into topics, it just makes it so much easier to organize your book. When it comes to fiction, you can keep track. It's really important to keep track of your characters. And so I've talked to a lot of writers who say they use a spreadsheet. So if you have an Excel program, that's a popular one that people use for keeping track of their characters. You could use a physical notebook. But each character has its own list of qualifications. So they're not a linear topic. So depending, even if your character in your story is not necessarily going to be a major character, you still need to know as much about them as possible. So you're going to know their physical appearance, their eye colors, their job, their parents, their siblings, whether they're married or not. You want to know if they have any physical impediments. For instance, does Monique have arthritis in her left knee? And this is where when you're sitting in the kiosk at the mall and watching people, you can take some of those characteristics and start, oh, that'll look good in this character and this character. So really break down into as much detail as possible about these characters, what they're thinking, what their political thoughts are, what would they do if this happened and this happened. So as much detail as you can get into knowing who each of your characters are, the better. And that is a daunting task. So that is why you would need a spreadsheet, because one thing I can guarantee you, unless you have a photogenetic memory, you will never remember every word you wrote. So you're going to have to write this stuff down somewhere. And if you have writer's block, and that happens, you can be sailing along, putting this stuff together, and you've got half your book written, half the stories are there, and all of a sudden, blank, you come to a brick wall and you don't know what to do. Again, you can go to the mall, you can do those things, and if still nothing shakes up the creative juices, there are a whole bunch of books out there that will also help you with exercises to kind of get you in that writing mode. So once you start doing a couple of those exercises, what usually happens is it clicks your brain, and all of a sudden you'll put that down and you'll go back to your story. When it comes to writing, you've got to practice. You can't be an NHL hockey player if you've never put a pair of skates on and never practiced. And it's the same with writing. Writing is no different than any other profession. And if you want to be good at writing, you've got to practice. You've got to write. There's only one way to be a writer, and it's to write. There's no shortcut. You just have to write. And the first draft of anything you do is going to have errors and flaws. Even the first draft, after you put the words on the page and you go through and you start organizing it and shuffling this and start shaping it a bit, you're still going to have errors and flaws. It takes a long time. It takes many tries at the manuscript to go through it to finally be comfortable enough that you can't see it, and then maybe you turn it over to somebody else to look at it, like an editor, not your mom or your sister, unless they have writing in their background. You want somebody who's an actual writer or an editor to look at your work to help shape it and make it better. And your work it doesn't matter how good your work is, it just needs polishing. I know that any book that I have written, I can go back. I never reread any of my books because I know that no matter how many times I've gone through them and other people have gone through them to edit them, I can go back and just look at the first page and know, oh, I want to change that. So it's something that everybody's work needs polishing, and sometimes it comes to that point where you have to let it go. But I'd say if you've gone over it at least 7 times, you're on your way there. And there is no right or wrong way. It's what works for me may not work for you, or may not work for your friend. It's whatever is comfortable in having that process done. So you don't have to have it in print. Your story can be audio, and there are audio editing programs. Adobe Audition is one that I like to use, and there's video editing programs. If you're a photographer, I mean, some of the best books we've seen have been photography books, and nothing tells a story as well as a good picture or a painting. So don't be hamstrung by a certain format, especially if it's not comfortable for you. Although you want to stretch your limits. If you're comfortable in certain formats, it doesn't hurt to try and do some storytelling in a different format, because that way it stretches your ability as a storyteller and a writer. So some tips on writing this: you want to show, don't tell. So that can be difficult sometimes in finding the way to tell a story. But you can look at some of the good authors and see, read a few Stephen King short stories, read some Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe is probably, well, for me, he's just some of the best short stories have come out of that book for me. He's so colorful with the words, and there's a lot of writers. Look at your favorite writers and take a look at how they craft a scene, and how do they share that scene? Do they show it? Do they tell it? Use all 5 senses, and you can't do everything in one sitting. Once you get tired, your eyes will get tired on you, and even if you're on the deadline, you're going to have to take a break from the computer. I think you can effectively look at the computer maybe an hour at a time if you're writing, and you need to take a 10-15 minute break after every hour at least to kind of like shake the cobwebs off your eyeballs. So whether that goes to, you go turn on the TV, pet the cat, whatever you do, just shake those cobwebs off your eyeballs for after an hour. And if you've got your topics broken down and your chapters broken down, you don't necessarily have to write in sequence. It's like most movies are not shot in sequence. They're shot in scenes, and you can do that with your book. Editing is one of the most important parts of writing, and grammar, punctuation, these are the things that really jump off the page when it's poor writing. And the Chicago Manual of Style is a Bible that you can have in your toolbox, and they have an online version. I'm not sure how much it costs now. I have a physical copy. So, but it is a very good book to answer a lot of your questions on editing and grammar. And it also walks you through how to format a book. So spelling is obviously something that is very important, and sometimes we might spell a name different throughout the book. So that's something that will have to be caught later on. In order to find the flow and the construction of the book, sometimes it's better to print it off and read the physical page, and that way you can catch those things a little easier. Same with the really tiny errors. You can usually catch those more when you print off the page. Redundancy is using the same word. Say you use the same word 3 times in one paragraph. You'll find another word for it and use a thesaurus. Some of the common errors, and these are very common. I'm not going to necessarily walk through every single one of them, but capitalization is key. Your capitalization is where I find a lot of errors. You only capitalize a proper noun if it's not at the beginning of the sentence, and so the Chicago Manual Style or other style books will guide you on when to capitalize and when not to capitalize. And the language, you need to be consistent with the language. So if you're going to use American English, it's got to be American English through the whole book. You don't jump into Oxford English or Canadian English, so you make it consistent. And another very common error is the spacing after period. It is, and I know they still teach this in school, but it's wrong. Spacing after period. There's only one space after punctuation. Period. One space after any punctuation. And that happened when they brought in word processing on a computer. So that is something that jumps off the page when in publishing. Here's some editing tips. So you want to simplify your language. Don't use 5 words when 1 will do. Never assume. This is huge. I've gone through so many books that I was editing and struggled with some abbreviations, and sometimes the industry jargon does not compute. Everybody has their own jargon, even your own workplace. You have a different jargon in your workplace that anybody outside that workplace wouldn't know. So be careful of the types of words that you choose. And whenever you're not sure about something, just look it up in the style guide. And all right is 2 words, not 1. Just had to throw that one in there. And one of the best ways to practice editing is to edit your emails, because Lord knows most people don't. So there are so many different formats now. We're so lucky in what we have available technology-wise to create a story. We can, even if we do a print book, we can do it ourselves. There are programs everywhere that help you format a book. There's no right or wrong way to put a story together. It's really comes right down to your audience and what you're comfortable with. So regardless of how you put it together, go out and find your voice and start writing. And that is the only way you're going to be able to make your manuscript come true.